Here's your complete start set guide to every running back in every matchup of week 6. If you like this style of video, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps me out a ton as a creator and it'll help you get these videos every week, but these videos will speak for themselves. I don't waste time, let's get right into it with Saquon Barkley in the S tier. It's a little bit smaller of an S tier than usual, which we will get into, but Saquon, he gets a tougher matchup against the Browns. They are not very positive in fantasy points allowed to running backs this year. A lot of that comes from the Browns offense not being able to stay on the field, putting more pressure on their defense. If the Eagles go up early, which they should be able to do, Saquon Barkley and his 8 yards per carry are going to dominate and get more than enough usage. Next up, Derrick Henry. He's on a 5-game touchdown streak. I expect that to continue here against the Commanders. They are a little bit tougher against the run than they are against the pass, but they do allow 5.2 yards per carry, and the Commanders aren't very likely to blow out the Ravens, so they should be able to stay completely run heavy, which is great for Derrick Henry. Dropping it down to the A tier, we do have Bijan Robinson. This might be a little bit high for some people considering his touches have been decreasing, but he gets one of the best matchups of the week against the Carolina Panthers, who are allowing 23 fantasy points a game to the running back position. The Falcons should very easily be able to control this game and stick to a run-heavy script, which will be positive for Bijan Robinson. Chase Brown, Zach Moss, Roschon Johnson, all of these guys have put up 14 or more fantasy points on the Panthers in the last few weeks, and those aren't necessarily household names. And then we have Kamara coming off a lower volume game against the Chiefs last week. It is one of the toughest run defenses in the league. Now he gets a matchup this week against the Buccaneers with Spencer Rattler at quarterback. And this might seem a little bit risky to put Kamara this high considering the rookie quarterback with not much experience. But when you look at this matchup, the Buccaneers run the #1 most zone coverage in the NFL at 84%. With rookie quarterbacks that play against the zone coverage, they really struggle. But historically, rookie quarterbacks that play against zone heavily use their checkdowns. And when you have Alvin Kamara, an amazing checkdown merchant of a running back, he should see north of 5 receptions this week. So even if the Saints get blown out or it's not a good run script for them, his receptions alone should keep him in this tier. And we'll follow that up with Jahmyr Gibbs coming off the bye week, allowing this team a chance to get healthy, which they have definitely needed. But probably the most important fact about this matchup is that Dan Campbell told the media Gibbs is ready and about to take off, which is encouraging when you look at this backfield with David Montgomery. And usually when coaches say these kinds of things, for the most part, they're pretty true. And if we look at historical data from last year, after the bye week is when Jahmyr Gibbs absolutely started to break off and become that top running back that we drafted. And this looks like it's going to happen again in this matchup against the Cowboys. The matchup is projected to be pretty high scoring, so there should be a ton of ball movement and offense going everywhere to give Gibbs some usage. And he is getting more of a touchdown role through this year and the end of last year than he was in the beginning, which is always a plus when you have David Montgomery, who scored 19 touchdowns on his last 20 games, which I will get into later. But moving down to Josh Jacobs, he saw 22 touches last week with Jordan Love back in this offense, and as long as we have those two things, Jacobs is going to be perfectly fine, especially in this matchup against the Cardinals, who are very positive 2 runs and pretty much every aspect of the offense allowing the 5th most points to opposing running backs. But looking at James Cook, he's been pretty good because these Bills wide receivers have not been carrying their slack and are really hurting Josh Allen. He's the only guy that they can really trust at this point, and he's getting the most rushing usage he ever has in his career. He has 4 touchdowns. That's already more touchdowns than he did last season, and he only has 1 game under 13 fantasy points this year, obviously coming off a ton of usage in the receiving game, which is not going to change. He does get a matchup against a tougher Jets defense, but they do have a coaching change, so there is a chance that the offense just does not look good. The Bills can actually go up and stick to a run-heavy script. That's obviously assuming that he's not going to be out with his turf toe injury. He's questionable. He probably will play, but keep an eye on that for the later parts of this week. Following that, we're going to have Breece Hall, who has been extremely up and down, especially with Braylon Allen. He gets a matchup against the Bills, who are softer against the run than they are against the pass, averaging 4.8 yards per carry allowed to the running back position. But historically, Breece has averaged 15 points a game against the Bills, so there is some upside here, and this is a week for the Jets where they have a coaching change. You'd expect them to be more run heavy, and he's been efficient on his touches. They also have been going down like Bijan Robinson, but I guarantee you, if he sees 20 touches, he is going to crush this week. It literally comes down to the point, if he gets usage, he will be great. But who says he's going to get enough usage? That's the real question with Breece Hall and why he's ranked where he is. Looking down at James Conner, he had 13 fantasy points despite no touchdowns last week, 19 or more touches in 4 of his last 5 games. The good thing about James Conner in this offense is it doesn't matter if the Cardinals are down in games. We saw against the Commanders and other games this season, when they are down by multiple touchdowns, they don't abandon the run game, which is good for James Conner when you look at the matchup against the Packers, who are allowing 12.5 points a game to running backs this year, as well as 4.6 yards per carry. They're relatively positive, more in the middle. And then we're going to be putting Joe Mixon back in these tiers. Haven't even talked about him since week 1. He's been out with injury, but he's healthy, and he gets a matchup against the Patriots where we are starting him, no questions asked. This guy, when healthy, is the RB1 in carries per game, RB5 in rush share, RB6 in red zone opportunities, in a positive matchup and a positive game script against the Patriots, who allow the 10th most points to opposing running backs, there is no reason the Texans should not be up early and often and stick to the run game. We saw in week 1, he was the only running back. They have a run RB system with Joe Mixon and nobody else. And then we'll be taking Chuba Hubbard, who has quietly been one of the best running backs in fantasy football. Pretty much an automatic start every week until Jonathan Brooks comes back, but that's a conversation for probably next week. This guy's the RB8 right now, averaging 95.5 all-purpose yards throughout the entirety of the season. That includes the Bryce Young games where the Panthers were only scoring 7 points a game, and he's had at least 97 rush yards alone in his last 3 games. And he's getting a bunch of usage in the receiving game, 4 catches in his last 4. Now, it is a tougher matchup against the Falcons defense, but when you have Chuba averaging 6.1 yards per carry and 4 yards after contact, there's no reason we shouldn't be starting him. Then we'll look at Tony Pollard and David Montgomery, grouping them together. Pollard is another one of those guys who's been secretly pretty good so far this year, especially considering where we drafted him at. 19 touches or more in 3 out of his last 4 games. This matchup against the Colts is positive. They are top 10 in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. He's the RB5 in target share this year at 15.1%. That's not a super high number when you consider wide receivers and tight ends, but for running backs, he's the RB5. It's a really good spot. And with Monty, like I was talking about earlier, he's scored 19 touchdowns in his last 20 games. He's pretty much a lock to do that in a matchup against the Cowboys. Even with Gibbs expected to get a little bit more run this week, the Cowboys are allowing the 7th most points to opposing running backs. Next up, we have DeAndre Swift in a great matchup against the Jaguars, allowing the 3rd most points to opposing running backs. And this is one that's a little bit risky. The only drawback is that the Bears continue to give Roschon Johnson red zone opportunities, which obviously is going to take his floor down a lot. DeAndre Swift has never really been like a solid red zone guy, so I doubt that fact is going to change. But when you have a matchup against the Jaguars who are struggling on offense and the Bears who are getting a little bit more efficient as the weeks go on and as Caleb Williams gets more acclimated to the NFL, Swift should be a good play. Then we'll grab Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler. These rankings will change depending on the health of Brian Robinson. He is still questionable coming into this matchup, so it's likely going to be a game time decision. At least at the time of this recording, it's not decided. If he misses, Austin Eckler is going to be bumped up a little bit in these rankings. If he does play, they're both going to be moved down a bit because it is a tough matchup against the Ravens, allowing the 7th least points to opposing running backs. The good news is that this game is projected to be the highest scoring game of the week, so you want to take bits and pieces from here where you can. Just monitor that injury information as the week goes on. But Najee Harris has no choice but to be this high in these rankings. Cordero Patterson is out. Jaylen Warren likely going to be out, and he gets a matchup against the Raiders, who allow 5.2 yards per carry to running backs on the year, which is top 5 in the NFL. And Najee in the second half of the year, for some reason, if you just look at his historical data, always performs better. Next up, we have Bucky Irving going to be in these rankings this high because Rachaad White is doubtful, most likely not going to play in this matchup. Again, Bucky's only rostered in 65% of leagues. For some odd reason, if he's out there, please go check and pick him up right now. But one missed game could be the only thing Bucky needs to have a very important role in this offense season long and increase already more than what he's doing now. Even behind Rachaad White, he's averaging 10 touches a game and very efficient on the ground. He's essentially a more efficient Rachaad White from 2023 in his breakout when he was the RB4. This coming against a Spencer Rattler-led offense in the Saints, which probably won't be up by a ton in this game, leading to a more run-heavy script. Then we're looking at J.K. Dobbins coming off his bye week, but he does get a tougher matchup against the Broncos defense. But his run volume is pretty good. 18 or more touches in the last 3 games, 3 or more receptions in the last 3 out of 4 for him. So we'll be getting a fully Justin Herbert coming off the bye week, as well as some offensive linemen, which is really going to help running backs and him specifically. And we'll follow that with Trey Sermon and Travis Etienne. There is some good, but there is definitely some bad and some drawbacks here. For Sermon, we have no JT, obviously going to be a plus, but it looks like Anthony Richardson is going to play this week, which is going to be a minus, a red flag for you, because the check down rate compared to Anthony Richardson and Joe Flacco is 2 different worlds, completely different. Because when you're Anthony Richardson, why not just take off and run instead of checking it down, which is going to hurt Trey Sermon a little bit. Goodson is also going to get a little bit of run here taken away from that. So he's definitely not as strong of a start as some people make it seem, but he's still viable for sure. Then we have Etienne, for some reason dealing with injury, but not really on the injury reports, but getting restricted in games. He saw 38% of the snaps last week. But he gets a matchup against the Bears run defense, which should help the Jaguars stay with a run-heavy script. He also does get usage in the receiving game, so as long as this game can stay close, I think Etienne is in for a fine week. He's projected for 4 receptions this week. That's going to give him a floor of about 6 fantasy points, so I really don't have too much worry. But then I'll group Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary together here. Another one of those RB duos where there is injury concern. If Devin Singletary does end up missing this game, Tracy's going to move up a good amount in these rankings. But if he does, they're both going to move down a bit. And we look at Tyrone Tracy. He had 18 rushing attempts last week on only 63% of the snaps with no Devin Singletary. I mean, he ran routes out of the backfield as well. It's pretty much everything you want to see, especially from a rookie running back. The Bengals defense also hasn't been anywhere near good this season, so it is a positive matchup. The Giants don't have Malik Neighbors, but they should be able to generate some kind of offense. I hope Singletary's out for the fact that Tracy will do pretty good, but it looks like he's going to play, moving them both down. But keeping it on that fact, more running backs with injuries, Chase Brown and Zach Moss, and this is a similar situation. If Chase Brown misses, Zach Moss is going to move up a good amount in these rankings because they get a matchup against the Giants, who are allowing 5 yards per carry to the running backs this year. Both these running backs have a healthy amount of usage in the receiving game. So all of this is going to come down to the health of Chase Brown. But guys, if you have specific start-sit questions, please drop them in the comments. I'm trying to get to every single one, and I would love to help you guys out. But I'll group some more running backs together here. Javonte, Rico Dowdle, Ford, Gibson, all together. Now, Javonte, he's actually been a lot better than the numbers have said. He got 2 touchdowns called back. He gets work in the receiving game. We know Sean Payton loves to target his running backs, and the Broncos defense has been playing really good, allowing them to lean a little bit more on the run than usual. And that's really going to be tested here in a really tough matchup against the Chargers defense, who are allowing the 4th least points to opposing running backs this year. So take that for what you will. Then we have Rico Dowdle getting a tough matchup against the Lions, allowing the number 1 least points to opposing running backs. So 2 back-to-back guys here with not great matchups. The good news is you can expect this Cowboys offense to score a ton. There should be touchdown opportunities. It looks like Ezekiel Elliott is only getting phased out of this offense more and more by the week, followed by Jerome Ford. And take your guesses for how many touches you think he's going to get, because one week he'll get some, one week he'll get none. We really don't know how many touches Foreman is going to get, and it looks like it can't be predicted. So until that actually has some consistency to it and we can predict that, I don't really love firing up Jerome Ford. He's a boom-bust guy. If he gets the usage, he'll be fine, but there's no telling he will. And that's followed up by Antonio Gibson, which I'm fine moving him up the rankings just a little bit because we have no Ramondre Stevenson. He is out for this matchup against the Texans. They are a pretty good defense, but Antonio Gibson is one of the most efficient running backs. He's a top RB this season in yards per touch. On top of that, you can't really expect JaMycal Hasty to take a bunch of usage from him. This offense just isn't great. We do have Drake May playing, so maybe that gives him some light. I would go ahead and pick up Antonio Gibson off the waivers, though, just in case that Drake May ends up being so much better than Jacoby Brissett, but I doubt he's out there. We've had him in some stash videos and waiver wire videos in the past, so you guys probably have him on your roster by now. But then we'll take Tank Bigsby against the Bears in this matchup. It is positive. ETN should be fully good to go, but there is always that chance that he doesn't get full touches, which makes Tank Bigsby a really good play because he's insanely efficient on the touches he does get. There is some trade rumors going around that ETN might get traded to another team, which would make Tank Bigsby a league winner, but that's besides the point, and speculation, which we can't really depend on in fantasy football. But for some reason, if ETN doesn't get his full volume, Tank Bigsby is a guy that can take that, averaging 6 yards after contact, 8 yards per carry on the season. Pretty good, but not too much opportunities with ETN healthy, of course. And then we'll take Tajay Spears, Alexander Mattison, Roschon Johnson, and Justice Hill all ranked together. Tajay Spears had some success against the Dolphins last week, but there still is a very big discrepancy in touches and time on field between him and Tony Pollard. That's going to restrict him. He does get a positive matchup against the Colts, which maybe he'll get a little bit of extra run, but behind Tony Pollard, who's been playing the way he has, you can't expect a ton more than what he gets now. Then we have Alexander Mattison in a timeshare with Zamir White, who should play this week, but if he doesn't, Alexander Mattison will move up. But it is one of the hardest matchups against the Steelers' run defense. Their defense in general is just pretty good this year, so I like to avoid those matchups where I can. The Raiders' offense isn't necessarily amazing with Aiden O'Connell this week. We'll see what that looks like. But Roschon Johnson is here simply because of his red zone usage. We've seen in previous weeks that he just, for some reason, gets a ton of usage in the red zone next to DeAndre Swift, which I guess makes some sense, but not enough to be viable every single week. He's going to be relying on those to get you some fantasy points. But if you're in deeper leagues, maybe you can do it because of the matchup. It is so good against the Jaguars. And Justice Hill will be a solid play if the Ravens go down in this game and the Commanders have a lead. That's not very likely, though. I mean, the Commanders are playing good, but I don't know if they're completely trustworthy enough to put Justice Hill in our lineup because of that. He's only viable when the Ravens are down in games. This shouldn't be a game where that's happening. And then we'll follow that with some other handcuff running backs in this order that can be started with Jaleel McLaughlin, Tyler Algier, Ray Davis, Braylon Allen, Tyler Goodson, and Emmanuel Wilson. But that is going to finish off these running back rankings. Thank you guys for watching the videos all the week through. I will see you on Monday for the waiver wire ads coming very soon. Good luck in fantasy this week.